Hello guys, in this video we will discuss a manhwa called Return of the Blossoming Blade Part 1. The world was now painted in red and everything in his vision was crimson. The only thing left in that place was death. He couldn't help but wonder if this much bloodshed was necessary. Memories flooded his mind. His Cheongmyeong, Jangmon, Sanjita, and Sejils all lay lifeless. The clash between over 20 different sects, including the 10 Great Sects and the ultimate military unit composed of the elites with Heavenly Demon Sect, had resulted in complete annihilation. The blame rested solely on one man, the demon sent from the skies, the leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect, Cheonma, the Heavenly Demon. Chunmei's voice echoed through the crimson battlefield as he addressed the only surviving disciple of the Mount Hua Sect. He spoke of the unfortunate fate that had befallen the young warrior, who could have boasted about killing him for the rest of his life if he had managed to escape alive. However, Cheonma acknowledged that their journey had come to an end, and there was no way they could go any further. He then proceeded to praise the protagonist's swordsmanship, acknowledging the Mount Hua Sect's swordsmanship as the greatest in the world. But before he could finish his words, the protagonist, with only one arm remaining, shouted for Cheonma to shut up and charged toward him with his sword. But Cheonma continued to speak and expressed his disappointment at not having enough time. Just one more day, he could become a man befitting his name, Cheonma. He warned the protagonist that their battle was not the end and that the demons would return, taking over the world, and no one would be able to stop them. As he cut the head of Cheonma, his mind raced with thoughts. He couldn't help but think about the war that had just ended and the inevitable death that was now approaching him. He wondered about the fate of the Mount Hua Sect, now that every single member and the followers of the sect members who had also lost their lives, leaving behind only powerless children. He questioned whether all the bloodshed caused by the Mount Hua Sect had actually been meaningful. He wondered if he had been even a little more dedicated to training, he could have saved at least one more life. But all these thoughts were now meaningless. As he fell down on the pile of corpses, he thought about the fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of its end. He couldn't help but reflect on the poetic beauty of plum blossom bloom, which, like life, must come to an end at some point. The 13th disciple of the great Mount Hua Sect and one of the 3 great swordsmen known as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint Cheongmyeong. After killing Cheonma, who had caused destruction and chaos in the world, he took his last breath atop the headquarters mountain of the Heavenly Demon Sect. This short anecdote would be the only legacy he left behind in this world. A small abandoned child was found outside the Mount Hua Sect and was taken in as a disciple. As he grew up, he trained alongside the other disciples of his age. One day, a senior disciple shouted at him, calling him Cheongmyeong. Cheongmyeong couldn't help but wonder if his life was flashing before his eyes. The senior disciple scolded him, saying that he was an ascetic practitioner before a martial artist, and that power without ethics was only violence. Cheonma was tired of hearing the same lecture over and over again. Although he was a disciple of the Mount Hua Sect, he knew that he couldn't completely follow all of its teachings. He felt that he was receiving undeserved attention because of his talents, but in reality, he was still a rookie in the sect. He realized that everything he had achieved came from the teachings of the Mount Hua Sect. Suddenly, an old figure appeared and spoke. It was his Salyong Jangmon. He asked Cheongmyeong if he regretted his past. Cheongmyeong replied honestly, admitting that he did regret it. He wished that if he had been more dedicated to following the teachings of the Mount Hua Sect and trained hard, he could have changed the tragic ending of the story. However, his Salyong comforted him and told him that there was no need to regret it. The Mount Hua Sect would continue to exist no matter what happened. As Cheonma tried to understand the situation, he was suddenly struck in the head. He yelled out in shock. He initially thought that Cheonma was the one who had hit him, but he immediately dismissed that thought as impossible since he had already killed Cheonma and he should be dead. As he opened his eyes, he saw that it was a young beggar holding a bamboo stick in his hand. The young beggar repeated the name Cheonma in a questioning tone, but suddenly he started shouting and insulting Cheongmyeong, accusing him of sleeping in late while everyone else had already gone to bed. Cheongmyeong was confused by the situation, wondering why this beggar was threatening him. He tried to reason with the young beggar, asking him to put down the bamboo stick. However, the young beggar only laughed in response, much to Cheongmyeong's frustration. Despite being one of the Plum Blossom Sword Saints, a person respected even by the leader of the Beggars' Union, Cheongmyeong found himself being threatened and insulted by a mere child. As he tried to make sense of the situation, the young beggar interrupted his thoughts and attacked him with the bamboo stick, telling him that he was going to die today. As the young beggar attacked, Cheongmyeong quickly tried to block the swing. However, he was surprised to find that his hand had become incredibly short, too short to effectively block the attack. In a moment of panic, Cheongmyeong was unable to defend himself and the attack landed on his head. The young beggar continued to lash out at Cheongmyeong, thrashing him and shouting in anger. He demanded to know if Cheongmyeong still didn't understand something and vowed to make him understand completely. The beggar believed that there was a degree to which a person could lose their mind and that a good beating would be enough to snap Cheongmyeong out of it. The beating continued with Cheongmyeong unable to defend himself. Suddenly, a beggar entered the room and witnessed the scene before quietly leaving, planning to return later. The only sound that could be heard from Cheongmyeong's room was his desperate plea for mercy as he begged to be spared from the relentless beating. After getting beaten up, Cheongmyeong sat at the edge of a lake and cleared the blood in his nose. He made some painful sounds and thought about how he had never been beaten this badly, even in the Mount Hua Sect. Trembling with anger, he decided that he would take care of the beggar's union, even if it was for the sake of that brat. As he looked at the water and saw his reflection, he wondered who this child he saw was. He thought about the possibility of reincarnation that was mentioned in Buddhism, and thought that if he knew reincarnation was possible, he would have entered Shaolin Temple instead of Mount Hua. Suddenly, the beggar who had left Cheongmyeong's house when he was getting beaten appeared and called out to him. Cheongmyeong turned back and recognized him and asked if he was the one who had run away instantly. The beggar asked if he was all right and revealed that the young beggar Wang Shou beat him was always like that, but today he had gone a little overboard. Cheongmyeong interrupted the young beggar and raised his finger and said that he wanted to ask one thing, but after a moment he changed his mind and raised two fingers while saying, "Let me ask you two things." Both Cheongmyeong and the beggar looked at each other, and the beggar had a confused look on his face. After a moment of silence, Cheongmyeong asked in a serious tone, "Am I a beggar?" The young beggars responded by saying that it was obvious that they were both beggars, given the state of Cheongmyeong's clothing. Cheongmyeong sat down and, all scratching his head, exclaimed in frustration and disbelief that he couldn't possibly be a beggar. He then turned to the young beggar and asked his second question, demanding to know if he knew who Cheonma was. The young beggar looked at Cheongmyeong with annoyance and commented that he had initially thought he was acting normally for someone who had been badly beaten, but now it seemed he was mistaken. Cheongmyeong, losing his patience, shouted at the young beggar to just answer his question. The young beggar sighed and replied that he knew who Cheonma was. He was the leader of the heavenly demon sect who had died 100 years ago. Upon hearing this, Cheongmyeong was shocked and shouted in disbelief at the revelation that Cheonma had died 100 years ago. Cheongmyeong grabbed the young beggar's shirt and repeated in disbelief that Cheonma had died 100 years ago. The young beggar, confused by Cheongmyeong's actions, asked what he was doing, but Cheongmyeong ignored the question and demanded to know if he was telling the truth. The young beggar replied that there was no benefit to lying to him, and Cheongmyeong let go of his shirt. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. 100 years had passed since he had killed Cheonma. Cheongmyeong's frustration grew as he wondered why he couldn't have been sent back to the time right after he died. He felt as though he had been abandoned in a world that had moved on without him and was left wondering how things could have gone so wrong. The young beggar noticed Cheongmyeong's distress and asked if he was all right, but Cheongmyeong remained lost in his own thoughts. He then remembered the Mount Hua Sect and how they had been one of the most powerful sects in the martial arts world, and wondered if they had also been affected by the passage of time. Cheongmyeong turned to the young beggar and asked him about what had happened to Mount Hua Sect. However, the young beggar looked confused and asked what the Mount Hua Sect was. Cheongmyeong's mind was filled with questions after hearing young beggar's reply. He then asked him if he was a beggar, to which the young beggar replied in the affirmative, stating that he was just like Cheongmyeong. Cheongmyeong continued his questioning and assumed that since the young beggar was part of the Beggars' Union, he must know about the Mount Hua Sect, which was one of the 10 Great Sects, just like the Beggars' Union. He expressed his disbelief that the beggar didn't seem to know what he was talking about, but the beggar looked at Cheongmyeong with a questioning expression and replied, asking him what nonsense he was spouting. He then listed out the 10 Great Sects, including the Shaolin Temple, the Wudang Ashen Sect, Kongtong Sect, Qingqing Sect, the Lotus Order, Southern Island Sect, Kunlun Sect, the Beggars' Union, and the Southern Edge Sect. He stated that there was no such thing as the Mount Hua Sect in the 10 Great Sects. Cheongmyeong was left confused by the beggar's response, wondering how it was possible that the Mount Hua Sect wasn't part of the 10 Great Sects. Cheongmyeong grabbed the young beggar's shirt and shook him with surprise. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. The Southern Island Sect had become one of the 10 Great Sects, and the Mount Hua Sect was no longer a part of them. Cheongmyeong's focus quickly shifted as he demanded to know more about the Mount Hua Sect. The young beggar struggled to remember anything useful until he suddenly recalled something about the Shanxi province map. He spoke up and said that he had heard of such a sect before and that it might be on the Shanxi province map somewhere. Cheongmyeong was immediately intrigued and asked if the young beggar knew anything more. The beggar continued and said that while he wasn't sure if the Mount Hua Sect was one of the 10 Great Sects, he did know that the sect had already fallen. This news stunned Cheongmyeong, who couldn't believe that the Mount Hua Sect, one of the 3 most prominent sects in the world, along with the Wudang and the Northern Loyalty family, had fallen. He released the young beggar, who fell to the ground. Cheongmyeong refused to believe it and declared that he needed to see it with his own eyes. After the young beggar fell to the ground, he looked at Cheongmyeong in confusion. Cheongmyeong declared that he was heading to Mount Hua to see the situation for himself. The young beggar warned him not to go, as he might get beaten up again, and suggested that he should just go begging instead. Cheongmyeong shouted at him to be quiet and demanded that he answer a few more questions. He pointed to himself and asked the young beggar to identify him by name. The young beggar replied in a questioning tone, "Why would a beggar have a name?" The beggar eventually gave in and said that Cheongmyeong's name was Cho-sam. He then asked about his age, and the young beggar replied that he wouldn't know since beggars didn't keep track of their age. Cheongmyeong stretched his cheeks and estimated his age to be around 15 or 16, based on his skin. Cheongmyeong continued with his questioning and asked for the young beggar's name and the name of the person who had beaten him. The young beggar, somewhat surprised by Cheongmyeong's request, asked if he really did not remember anything. He then gave his name as Q7, and the name of the person who beat Cheongmyeong was Q8, but they called him Wang Cho. Cheongmyeong declared that he repays favors twofold and returns grudges tenfold. He asked the Q7 to remember his name, Cheongmyeong of the Mount Hua Sect, and that he will return the favor the next time they meet. After saying this, Cheongmyeong began to walk away, leaving Q7 standing there alone, but soon he came back and approached Q7. He asked Q7 about the way for the Mount Hua of the Shaanxi province. The beggar, knowing that he had little choice in the matter, could only sigh in response. As soon as Cheongmyeong got the information he needed from Beggar 7, he took off running. With each step he took, his mind raced with the thought that he was moving on foot, without the aid of any transportation. Despite feeling exhausted and his face turning red from the exertion, Cheongmyeong pushed on, telling himself that he had never ridden anything as slow as a horse, even in his past life. And yet he was running now, with his body protesting against the strain. As he stumbled and fell to the ground, Cheongmyeong gasped for breath and exclaimed in frustration that he was going to die. He realized that his body was not fit for such a task and that he was already tired after only a few minutes of running. He couldn't help but think about the daunting journey ahead of him. How could he possibly make it to the Shaanxi province with his current physical condition? He knew he would likely pass out or even die on the way there. Just then, a smile spread across Cheongmyeong's face as he revealed that he had a plan. This was where his cunning and trickery would come into play. Cheongmyeong's determination grew stronger as he pulled his face out of the ground and laughed like a madman, with a sense of excitement coursing through him. He knew that he just needed to train himself in martial arts to make the most of this opportunity. Cheongmyeong was aware that even those who had reached the pinnacle of martial arts had regrets that they had not focused enough on the fundamentals when they were younger. Moreover, they also regretted not training harder when their seniors urged them to do so, and that they shouldn't have been caught drinking liquor that their seo had hidden away. Cheongmyeong recalled the taste of the alcohol, saying that it was delicious. As he started walking, Cheongmyeong resolved to find a place where he could avoid contact with the physical world as much as possible. Cheongmyeong sat down under the tree and contemplated his next steps. He had an abundance of knowledge about advanced martial arts techniques stored in his head, including the history of the Mount Hua Sect and methods of inner chi cultivation techniques. He knew that he could easily learn many techniques beyond the ones taught in the Mount Hua Sect. However, Cheongmyeong decided to start with a basic technique called equilibrium. Despite being a cheap technique sold in illegal street stores, equilibrium was one of the beginner techniques taught in the Mount Hua Sect. It did not significantly increase one's inner chi strength, but it was perfect for cleansing the body. Cheongmyeong understood the importance of building a strong foundation for his inner body strength, and he believed that perfecting equilibrium was the first step towards achieving this. He knew that he needed to precisely cleanse any impure energy absorbed from his surroundings, similar to fixing a small misalignment in a big fabric strand by strand. And if he could gather the cleansed energy into the danshin of his body, he would be on his way to becoming a formidable martial artist. Cheongmyeong had just completed his training in equilibrium, and he felt a sense of happiness washed over him. He believed that the danshin he had just developed would be the foundation that would open up a whole new world for him. With a small but firm energy, he was sure that it would roll like a snowball and eventually become an avalanche that no one would be able to stop. As he got up, he contemplated whether he should run to Mount Hua now, eager to put his newly acquired skills to the test. However, before he could take a step, he suddenly felt that something was amiss, and the next second he fell to the ground. Lying on the ground, Cheongmyeong realized that he had used up all his energy learning the technique. Equilibrium didn't help at all when he needed to use his body right away, and he cursed his misfortune. Just then, the image of his Sayeon appeared in his vision and spoke to him. He said that sometimes Cheongmyeong forgets to use his brain. However, Cheongmyeong was only told Sanyang to go away since he was pissing him. With a sense of desperation, Cheongmyeong shouted out loud, wondering how he would manage to reach Mount Hua at this rate. In a village area, a young beggar in a hurry walked into a street and approached an older man, calling out to him as brother. The older beggar asked what was the matter. The young beggar reported that a rookie beggar was intercepting all their begging money. He explained that this beggar was a kid who looked petty, and everyone gave their coins to him. The older beggar got up and said that they needed to teach the rookie beggar a lesson. The young beggar pointed out another beggar who was none other than Cheongmyeong. The older beggar shouted at Cheongmyeong, but he didn't react and continued eating. The older beggar shouted again, calling Cheongmyeong a little brat and asking if he was deaf. Cheongmyeong looked back and casually asked if the older beggar was talking about him. This made the older beggar angry, and he accused Cheongmyeong of speaking informally to him, claiming that the kid must have lost his mind at such a young age. Cracking his hands, the older beggar warned Cheongmyeong that he didn't know whose permission he had to get to beg there. He said that since Cheongmyeong was young, he would let him go unharmed, but only if he left everything he had and got out of there. Cheongmyeong looked at the beggars and then at the bun he was eating. He called the beggars out, saying they had no shame and were even taking his food. The younger beggar became angry and called Cheongmyeong a fucking brat. Cheongmyeong got up and started stretching his arms, then punched the air a few times, testing his strength. He announced that his dantian wasn't perfect yet, but it would do for now. He warned the beggars that he was weak and wouldn't hit them very hard, but they were welcome to come at him all at once. The older beggar became furious and ordered the two younger beggars to kill Cheongmyeong. As they ran to attack him, Cheongmyeong easily dodged the younger beggar's punch and retaliated with a punch of his own, sending the young beggar flying. Cheongmyeong shouted at the beggars, declaring himself as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the Great Mount Hua Sect, and began to fight back and started thrashing the three beggars. After Cheongmyeong beat up the beggars, all three of them sat on their knees with their bodies covered in bruises. The older beggar apologized for their behavior while calling Cheongmyeong chief. Cheongmyeong, who was eating a bun, questioned why the beggar referred to him as a chief. The beggar asked if he should be called chief beggar, but Cheongmyeong became angry and asked if he had just referred to him as a beggar. The older beggar bowed down and apologized again. Cheongmyeong then asked if by any chance they knew the quickest way to get to the Shaanxi province. The older beggar thought for a moment and then burst into laughter, saying that he was asking something so obvious. Cheongmyeong thought that the beggar might know something, so he asked him if he did know about Shaanxi province. The older beggar chuckled and replied that if they knew such things, they would be beggars. Cheongmyeong didn't say anything and simply looked at the old beggar. Cheongmyeong then started smiling and said that it seemed that he was barking up the wrong tree. He then started laughing and the older beggar joined in. However, he suddenly grabbed the older beggar's shirt, surprising him. The beggar looked at Cheongmyeong with a questioning expression as he warned him that if they were to meet again in the future, he better have an answer ready if Cheongmyeong were to ask him something. Otherwise, he might not be so lucky next time. Cheongmyeong then told them to leave if they understood him, and they quickly ran away, responding in a frightened voice that they understood what Cheongmyeong meant. In a valley surrounded by mountains with a breathtaking view, an elderly man stood beside a window, admiring the stunning scenery and the blooming plum blossoms. Suddenly, a voice called out to him from outside, addressing him as sect leader. The sect leader turned around and warmly welcomed the person, Anam, to come inside. Anam entered the room and mentioned that it was nothing important, but a child was requesting to meet the sect leader. Curious, the sect leader looked outside and saw Cheongmyeong standing there with his hands raised in greeting. Cheongmyeong respectfully greeted the sect leader, introduced himself, and expressed his desire to join the Mount Hua Sect. The sect leader pondered and asked Anam if he had informed Cheongmyeong that they were not accepting any new members. Anam confirmed that he had, but despite that, Cheongmyeong was very desperate to meet the sect leader. As they turned toward Cheongmyeong, he appeared to be smiling, but in reality, he was very irritated. To understand why, we need to go back a few moments ago. Cheongmyeong had arrived at Mount Hua with a stick in his hand and was panting heavily. He thought about the shortcut the three beggars had told him about, but it didn't help him much. Despite that, he was finally here, and he vowed not to forgive the beggars if they met again. With determination in his eyes, Cheongmyeong began climbing the stairs, panting heavily. He promised himself to climb as if his life depended on it. After climbing the stairs, Cheongmyeong began climbing the mountain. Suddenly, the rock he was holding on to fell, but he managed to balance himself. With the stick in his mouth, he looked down and thought that anything was possible if he was tenacious enough. He continued climbing and vowed to reach the top of Mount Hua. Once he reached the top, Cheongmyeong stood and looked ahead while panting heavily. He was in disbelief as he realized that the Mount Hua Sect signboard was missing. He shouted in frustration, remembering the past and the signboard that Saeyoung Jangmon cleaned every morning. He wondered where it had gone and was on the verge of going crazy. Just then, the sect door opened and someone asked who was there. Anam looked at Cheongmyeong and saw that it was just a kid. He asked if Cheongmyeong had come alone and how he managed to come all the way up here alone. Cheongmyeong looked at Anam but didn't answer the question. He thought to himself that he had just climbed up here. Nonetheless, he cleared his throat and said that he had something to ask. He wanted to know if Anam was a martial arts practitioner for the Mount Hua Sect. Anam confirmed that he was indeed from the Mount Hua Sect. Cheongmyeong felt happy knowing that the sect hadn't completely disappeared. Anam interrupted his thoughts and invited him inside. Cheongmyeong looked at him with a questioning gaze and asked what was going on. Anam explained that they weren't accepting any outsiders, but it was too late for him to climb back down. He said that they couldn't let a guest of the Mount Hua Sect climb back down in the middle of the night because it gets very cold on Mount Hua when the night falls. As Cheongmyeong entered through the sect door, he was taken aback by what he saw. The training grounds had a dirt floor, and he wondered why they hadn't used marble stones instead. Anam noticed his expression and asked what was wrong. Cheongmyeong tried to calm himself down and forced a smile, saying that the training ground was very spacious and nice. Anam seemed satisfied with his response. However, as they walked further, Cheongmyeong noticed that a whole building was missing, and he was shocked. He thought to himself in disbelief what happened to the Heavenly Golden Palace. Cheongmyeong pointed towards the missing building and asked Anam if it had always been empty. Anam responded with a hum, acknowledging that it was evident to Cheongmyeong as well. He explained that palaces once stood in the empty lot, but they were now gone. Cheongmyeong wondered where they had gone, but Anam just laughed and said that it was not something someone of his age would know. He admitted that it was embarrassing for a martial arts practitioner to say, but it was a wound of the glory of some sort. Cheongmyeong wasn't convinced and muttered, "Glory my ass." Anam asked him what he had said, but Cheongmyeong quickly dismissed it, saying it was nothing. Anam motioned for Cheongmyeong to follow him silently. As they walked, Cheongmyeong's thoughts wandered. He couldn't help but feel empathetic toward the Mount Hua Sect's decision to sell the Heavenly Golden Palace. He realized that they must have faced countless difficulties and hardships trying to keep the sect from disappearing up until now. After a while, Anam stopped in front of a building and declared that it was the Yuan Temple. Cheongmyeong took a moment to observe the temple and noted that it appeared to be intact. Anam opened the door and gestured for Cheongmyeong to enter. He whispered that the Mount Hua Sect was a martial arts sect, and as such, guests also had certain responsibilities. That included paying respects to their ancestors. So he told Cheongmyeong to prepare to pay respects to their ancestors. Cheongmyeong entered the room and had a questioning look on his face. He noticed that the golden candlestick bestowed upon ancestor Daton Hak by the emperor of the Jin dynasty, the hanging scroll written by hand by the ancestor, the gold plating decorations, and the paintings that used to fill the room were all missing. Cheongmyeong searched the room with his eyes, and his expression suddenly changed to one of surprise. He realized that a flower was missing. He exclaimed out loud, wondering where the flower had gone. Anam looked at Cheongmyeong, who was acting strangely, and said in a questioning tone, asked what flower. Cheongmyeong looked back and clarified that there was supposed to be a flower in the room and wondered aloud where it had gone. Anam heard his question and asked him how he knew about the flower. After a moment of thought, Anam recollected that there was a plum blossom made out of some strange white metal that used to be in the room. Cheongmyeong's eyes lit up with recognition, and he urgently asked where the flower was. As Cheongmyeong listened to Anam's explanation with an ashen face, Anam smiled and revealed the truth. They had sold the flower as they could not find any use for it, and it did not fit in with the temple's decor. However, they managed to find a merchant who was willing to buy it at a good price. Cheongmyeong fell down to his knees in shock and despair. He thought about the unfortunate fate of the Mount Hua Sect and how they had lost their sacred artifacts. These two sacred artifacts of the Mount Hua Sect were the white plum blossom of the nocturnal fragrance and the divine sword of the violet dawn. The white plum blossom of the nocturnal fragrance was not as showy as gold nor as flashy as silver, but it held the righteous spirit of the Mount Hua Sect, making it a sacred artifact. And now, these dumb asses had sold it off. As Cheongmyeong fell to his knees, Anam rushed towards him and asked if he was alright. Cheongmyeong knew that he needed to interfere as soon as possible before they made an even bigger mess. Suddenly, he bowed down to Anam and made a request. He asked Anam to allow him to meet with the sect leader and join the Mount Hua Sect. The scene then shifts to the present, where the sect leader looked at Cheongmyeong with a curious expression. He asked if Cheongmyeong knew about the Mount Hua Sect since he wanted to join them. Cheongmyeong confirmed that he did know about the sect and wanted to join the sect, and the sect leader pondered over the request. He knew that gaining entry into the sect wouldn't be an easy task. As he pondered on his next move, Cheongmyeong thought to himself that he had a plan. He decided to use the name of Cheongjin, who was said to have been lost in the midst of a war. Cheongmyeong went on to explain that Cheongjin had fallen off a cliff and was found by a passerby lumberjack who treated his wounds. In gratitude, Cheongjin taught the lumberjack the martial arts techniques of the Mount Hua Sect and treated him as his disciple. Cheongmyeong then revealed that he was the descendant of that lumberjack. Cheongmyeong's face lit up with a smile as he thought to himself that this was the perfect scenario. He was pleased that he could set his own position in the sect with this tale. As the grandson of the lumberjack, his position would technically be on the same level as the sect leader. This scenario was not only impressive, but would place him in a higher position than the youngsters. Cheonmyeong then eagerly awaited the sect leader's response, ready to face rejection or questions that might come his way. However, Cheonmyeong was taken aback by the sect leader's unexpected approval of his entry into the sect. He looked at the sect leader in confusion, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sect leader went on to explain that if Cheongmyeong really wanted to join the sect, then he should be allowed to do so. This decision surprised even An, who reminded the sect leader of his earlier statement about not accepting any more entries into the sect. However, the sect leader had a change of heart, believing that it was perhaps their destiny to accept Cheonmyeong into the sect. Cheonmyeong couldn't believe his luck, and he couldn't help feeling that the sect leader should have been more suspicious of strangers before accepting them into the sect. The sect leader then went on to explain his philosophy, stating that they didn't chase away birds seeking shelter or animals searching for food in the winter. Similarly, they couldn't deny a child who was desperately seeking entry into the sect. The sect leader then instructed An to provide Cheonmyeong with a place to stay and prepare for the entrance ceremony. An immediately bowed in agreement and promised to prepare everything right away. Cheongmyeong's plan had failed, and instead of being on the same level as the sect leader, he found himself at the bottom. He couldn't help but feel disappointed that his scheme had not worked out as he had intended. Cheonmyeong put on his new uniform and sighed, feeling a sense of disappointment in himself for wearing a third-rank disciple's clothing. He looked around the room, wondering where he was. He thought that he remembered this place being used as a guest room. He peered outside the room's door and found it strange that this was a temporary place for those scheduled to enter the sect. He recalled that the Mount Hua Sect originally didn't have private boarding rooms, and newly joined members would immediately form a bonding contract with their teacher, staying in their teachers' rooms. He walked outside his room and curiosity got the better of him, and he peeked through the door of a nearby room. To his surprise, he realized that people were staying in these rooms. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind, which startled him. Cheongmyeong turned around to find a disciple in the Mount Hua Sect's uniform standing behind him. The disciple shouted at him, questioning his intentions and asking if he was a thief. As the commotion continued, the residents of the dormitory were roused from their rooms and began to discuss the situation. One person asked what was happening, while another inquired about Gol's well-being. Gol explained that he had caught someone peeping into his room. Cheongmyeong sighed inwardly, wondering why he always seemed to attract trouble. Suddenly, a stern voice interrupted the commotion. It belonged to Great Sasek Ungum, the head of the boarding house, who demanded silence. Ungum entered the room and scolded the disciples for causing trouble in the dormitory when it was time for training. The disciples immediately apologized to Ungum. Ungum then turned his attention to Cheongmyeong and asked for his name. Cheongmyeong introduced himself, and Ungum recognized him as the new resident of the White Plum Blossom boarding house. Ungum instructed him to rest for the remainder of the day and participate in the training starting the next day. Meanwhile, the other disciples were told to leave and go downstairs. The disciples obediently followed Ungum out of the room. Gol, however, turned back and menacingly warned Cheongmyeong that he would deal with him later and teach him a lesson. After Gol left the dorm, Cheongmyeong stood alone with a blank expression on his face. He contemplated to himself, noting that they were his cute little successors of the Mount Hua Sect, and he would make sure to give them proper attention, even if his methods were different from others. After their training session, Gol approached Cheonmyeong and asked him to take them off. Cheonmyeong asked in confusion what should he take off. Gol asked him to take off everything he was wearing, suggesting that it was a way for men to become closer to each other. Gol proposed that he should take off all of his clothes, dance, and get beaten up a little bit, as this would strengthen his affection towards his Sayeongs. Cheongmyeong's expression turned dark at Gol's insistence to take off all his clothes. Cheonmyeong asked a question. He wanted to know about the boarding house advisor, Ungum, but Gol informed him that Ungum didn't train in the afternoon. He also remarked that the young brat couldn't stop talking, leading him to change his mind about their previous plan. Gol suggested they start with a little beating instead. Cheongmyeong then made an unexpected move, asking Gol to flex his neck muscles. Gol appeared confused by the request when suddenly Cheongmyeong's fist landed on his mouth, cutting him off mid-sentence. The impact was so powerful that it damaged the roof of the boarding house, leaving a hole behind. The disciples present in Plum Blossom boarding house were stunned as they witnessed Cheongmyeong's actions. Cheongmyeong stood with his fist raised high, and Gol was stuck on the roof of the boarding house. The boarding house members were moved to tears upon seeing Gol's predicament. Sometime later, all the disciples sat in a straight line and bowed to Cheongmyeong. Cheongmyeong then proceeded to order Sayoung Yoon-jong, who was massaging his shoulders, to apply more pressure and told him that he was giving him special treatment because he was great Sayoung there. Yoon-jong responded with a respectful tone and promised to do his best. Cheongmyeong looked at Gol, who was bowing down in front of him. As Cheongmyeong called out to Gol, he got up, visibly shaken with fear. But Cheongmyeong reassured Gol that he wouldn't harm him and asked him to come forward. He then explained that he was still not accustomed to the situation in the Mount Hua Sect and had a few questions for him. Gol replied respectfully and said that he can ask him anything. Cheongmyeong then asked Gol about the Heavenly Golden Palace and the reason behind the mess in the Mount Hua Sect. Gol hesitated for a moment and then asked if Cheongmyeong knew about the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. Cheongmyeong acknowledged that he did and internally thought that he was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. According to the Sassaks, the Plum Blossom Sword Saint played a major role in defeating Cheonma. However, this victory enraged the remaining groups of the Heavenly Demon Sect, who then pushed their way into the Zhanyuan region. For some reason, they forced their way all the way up to Mount Hua and set the entire mountain on fire. As a result, the Mount Hua Sect suffered severe damage and hasn't been able to recover its former strength. Upon hearing this, he realized that he may have been the reason why the Mount Hua Sect fell. He was filled with regret and frustration at this realization. Sayoung, Jangmun, and Cheonmyeong sat at a small table into the Mount Hua Sect. Jangmun brought up the Tei Flomok sword technique, which lacked Taoistic aspects and was not very powerful. He suggested that it wouldn't be problematic to remove the technique from the sect's teachings. Cheongmyeong, who was busy eating, agreed with Jangmun's assessment and even suggested throwing the technique away. Jangmun hesitated, as the technique was left behind by their ancestors. Cheongmyeong then suggested a solution to prevent children from taking an interest in it. They should remove it from the library entirely. Jangmun was pleased with the idea and agreed to follow through with it. Then, Jangmun changed the topic and revealed that he didn't call Cheongmyeong there just to discuss this issue. Cheongmyeong looked at Jangmun curiously, wondering what else he had in mind. Jangmun suggested that it was time for Cheongmyeong to take in some disciples and asked him how he planned to teach them. Cheongmyeong replied with a smile, suggesting that he would simply beat them up first. Once he beat them up to the brink of death, they will push their limits and make the impossible happen. After that conversation, Jangmun never brought up the topic of disciples again. Suddenly, Yoon-jong's voice interrupted Cheongmyeong's thoughts. Yoon-jong reported that the boarding house advisor Un-gum had called for Cheongmyeong to come to the SAM training grounds, where he would be participating in training starting that day. As all the disciples stood in the training grounds with blades in their hands and followed the instructions of Sayoung to perform the techniques, Cheongmyeong and Un-am stood side by side, watching the training. However, Cheongmyeong had a questioning look on his face. Cheongmyeong expressed his curiosity to Un-am, asking about the sword technique that the disciples were practicing. Un-am explained that the technique was called the equilibrium sword technique and was a fundamental sword technique for all the other techniques of the Mount Hua Sect. However, Cheongmyeong watched them practice with a strange expression on his face. He thought that the technique was not helpful in making the children stronger, and it was more like hindering their progress. In his opinion, the technique was too complicated for beginners and was similar to teaching the alphabet using a complex thesis book. He approached the training area with a sword in his hand and continued to contemplate his thoughts. Cheongmyeong believed that practicing this technique might give the trainees a temporary advantage, but without proper fundamentals, the technique would be of no use to them. He concluded that if the disciples were going to practice this technique, they should at least be taught correctly. Cheongmyeong gazed up at the beautiful blue sky and compared its nothingness to the future of the Mount Hua Sect. He felt lost and unsure of where to begin in order to help the sect. Turning to one of the disciples, he called out to him, startling the young man. Cheongmyeong then asked him what else they were learning aside from the equilibrium sword technique. The disciple stuttered slightly and explained that they would learn the sword technique of the 7 sages after mastering the equilibrium sword technique, and would then graduate from the Plum Blossom House to learn the Lesser King's sword technique. Finally, after learning everything, they would be able to learn the sacred technique of Mount Hua Sect, the Tei Flomok sword technique. Cheongmyeong's expression turned dumbfounded when the disciple mentioned Tei Flummox stored technique. Memories of Sayeong Jungmun's words resurfaced in Cheongmyeong's mind. His mouth hung open in disbelief as he processed the situation. He was frustrated and confused, unable to comprehend why they were learning the very technique they had agreed to throw away. He couldn't help but wonder what happened to the 24-movement plum blossom sword technique they were supposed to be learning instead. Suddenly, a Sayeong interrupted Cheongmyeong's thoughts by shouting, demanding to know who was talking and ordering the person to come forward immediately. In the plum blossom boarding house, Cheonma called out to Gul and asked Gul for a favor, and Gul eagerly agreed, asking what kind of favor he could do. Cheongmyeong instructed Gul to gather everyone in front of the white plum blossom boarding house at 5 a.m. the following morning and prepare 5 of those per person. Gul was taken aback by Cheongmyeong's request and asked if he really wanted him to prepare those. Cheongmyeong asked if Gul thought he couldn't do it, to which Gul responded nervously, saying that he will get the work done. As Cheongmyeong watched Gul leave, he reflected on the state of the Mount Hua Sect. He knew that the sect was lacking in wealth, technique, and talent, and that it could potentially collapse overnight. However, out of those 3 factors, Cheongmyeong believed that talent was the one thing he could control. Despite the current third-class disciples not seeming very talented, Cheongmyeong remembered the saying that a 1,000-mile journey starts with a single step. He saw bringing up these untalented Sayeongs as his first step in the journey to rebuild the Mount Hua Sect. At 5 in the morning, all the disciples gathered outside the White Plum Blossom boarding house. One of them expressed annoyance at the Saja, who made them come and go as they wished. He turned to Gul and Yoonjong and expected them to agree. Gul thought to himself that they probably weren't at the boarding house last night. Suddenly, Cheongmyeong appeared and asked if he was the Saja they were talking about. The Sayeong, who was complaining, confirmed that it was indeed him and questioned his lack of respect for his seniors. Cheongmyeong's face displayed some thoughts, but then he smiled widely and apologized, saying that he must have been lacking in his understanding of his Sayeongs. He approached the complaining Sayeong and suggested they have a little chat inside the boarding house as an apology. Cheongmyeong led everyone who was complaining inside the boarding house. The disciples who were left outside watched as the boarding house building soon started shaking. Gul was taken aback and thought to himself that the building was slightly shaking. Shortly after, all those who had entered the boarding house ran out in fear, forming lines outside. Cheonma expressed dissatisfaction at their behavior, but also asked them to be quieter, or else they would wake the great Sasuk who was complaining before. Cheongmyeong then greeted them and declared that they would be training together every morning at the same time. As the morning sun rose, Eun-gum opened his eyes and realized that no one had come to give their morning greetings. He felt slightly annoyed and thought to himself that everyone at the White Plum Blossom boarding house must still be asleep. As he got ready, he continued his thoughts, remembering that there was a newcomer in the house, so they all must still be asleep after completing their strange welcoming ceremony. He left his room and started walking while thinking that he would teach them a proper lesson this time. Eun-gum had initially thought that even if Joe Gold got a bit too wild, Yoonjong would be there to stop him from going overboard. However, as he arrived at the boarding house, he was puzzled by the sight before him. Some disciples lay on the ground while others tried to get up, and some struggled to catch their breath. Eun-gum looked at them and wondered why everyone was in such a bad condition. He couldn't contain his curiosity and asked in a loud voice what is going on here, but none of the disciples answered his question and they tried to avert their gazes. Eun-gum couldn't understand why the disciples were avoiding his question. As the senior of the house, they should have told him what happened. His eyes then fell upon Joe Gul, who looked like he had just come out of a grave. However, his attention was quickly drawn to the figure standing behind Joe Gul, the newcomer who had arrived the day before. Cheongmyeong was doing squats while lifting heavy weights placed on his shoulders. Despite his body trembling, he didn't stop and pulled up the weights and counted 10,085. Cheongmyeong cast his gaze downwards and noticed that Eun-gum was standing right beneath him. Realizing this, he addressed Eun-gum as Great Sasuk. Eun-gum returned his gaze, noting that Cheongmyeong appeared to be extremely fatigued, to the point where even his legs were shaking while he stood. Concerned for Cheongmyeong's well-being, Eun-gum turned and instructed disciples to bring him some water immediately. Cheongmyeong, however, insisted that there was no need to worry about it. Once he had quenched his thirst, Eun-gum asked him to explain what had happened. Cheongmyeong responded a smile, explaining that it was just a little exercise they had decided to do together starting that day, and that everyone was hyped up and pushed themselves a little too much since it was the first day. Eun-gum looked at the disciples, thinking were they really hyped up, and saw them shaking their heads in denial, but they all stopped as soon as Cheongmyeong looked at them. Eun-gum thought to himself, wondering how they could be so scared of this new kid. Thinking that he needed to give Cheongmyeong a warning, Gum reprimanded him, saying that the White Plum Blossom boarding house had its own set of regulations and asked who had given him permission to sacrifice sleep time for training. Cheonma simply replied, "Then I'll stop." Gum was taken aback by this unexpected response, and he thought to himself in anger that he could focus on the fact that Cheonma had threatened his seniors. However, as he looked at Cheongmyeong's innocent face, Gum gave up on the idea. He realized that if he were to do so, it would make everyone look like idiots, including himself for being pressured into training by a newcomer. Cheongmyeong interrupted his train of thought and requested a month's time from Gum. He promised to produce results within the given time frame, while also acknowledging and respecting his fellow disciples' determination during the challenging training session. He turned to them and asked if they agreed, and they responded in affirmation. Gum observed Cheongmyeong and thought to himself that he probably meant that nobody dared to complain to him. He wondered where someone like him had come from, as he had taken complete control over the third-class disciples, but intended to use that control solely for training purposes. Gum asked why Cheongmyeong insisted on training every morning, considering the difficulty of the task. Cheonma responded, saying that they could become strong enough with the Great Sects' teachings, but they could speed up the process by putting in more effort on their part. Therefore, it was reasonable for them to sacrifice their sleeping time for training. Gum then asked Cheongmyeong what he considered to be the most important aspect when treating his Saiyungs. Cheongmyeong responded that it was courtesy, and he would regard his Saiyungs as that of the skies. Gum smiled unknowingly when he thought that Cheongmyeong would not look down on his seniors but maintain his courtesy towards them to maintain the hierarchy. He then addressed the disciples, expressing his admiration for their determination to participate in training at dawn voluntarily. He encouraged them to continue their endeavors and assured them that they would achieve great results if they continued to do so. As Gum left, the disciples tried to ask for help, but he ran past them with lightning speed. After Gum was gone, Cheonma cracked his hands and with a smile, suggested that they have a little chat in the boarding house, assuring them that he did not intend to harm them in any way. After a while, only screams could be heard from the boarding house. A few days passed by as Cheonma sat down to train. He thought to himself about his progress and the things he had discovered about the Mount Hua Sect. He noted that his Danshin was still small and feeble, but it was beginning to settle in. He had also found out about the White Plum Blossom boarding house, which was a private dormitory made in a hurry due to the lack of people to form disciple master contracts with. Cheonma also thought about the sect leader and the duo, noting that despite their weak personalities, their strength couldn't even be compared to the Mount Hua Sect of 100 years ago. As a result, their disciples were terribly weak. However, Cheongmyeong was not deterred by this. He believed that with his presence in the sect, becoming the strongest sect was not an unachievable dream. In the dining hall, a group of disciples were seated, having their meals. One of them attempted to eat with chopsticks, but his chopsticks fell from his grasp, causing him to exclaim in frustration. He cried out that they shouldn't train to the point where they couldn't even eat properly. Turning to Joe Gul, he asked him to speak to Cheongmyeong on his behalf. He complained that he had been struggling with using chopsticks for days and was driving him crazy. Joe Gul remained silent for a moment. Finally, he spoke up, saying that they talked too much. He placed his chopsticks down and told them that their Saiyong wasn't their errand boy. He asked them why they didn't just go and speak to him directly, as there was no need to involve someone else. Joe Gul then stood up and addressed Yoon Jong, asking if he could have a moment of his time. Yoon Jong agreed, and the two of them walked away. As they walked outside, Yoon Jong commented on Joe Gul's refreshed appearance, but Joe Gul remained silent for a moment and then asked Yoon Jong his thoughts on the Mount Hua Sect. Yoon Jong expressed that it was a difficult question to answer. Joe Gul then shared that once he decided to return to his hometown, it would be all over for him. He wondered if Yoon Jong planned to spend his entire life in Mount Hua. Yoon Jong admitted that Joe Gul was correct. There was a moment of silence between them before Joe Gul spoke again, saying that he initially thought that the Mount Hua Sect was done for. Yoon Jong scolded him for being disrespectful and reminded him that it was not something he should say so easily. Joe Gul expressed that he had changed his mind about the Mount Hua Sect after Cheongmyeong arrived. He realized he had never pushed himself to the same extent in training. Seeing Cheongmyeong train intensely without showing any signs of fatigue inspired Joe Gul to try his best and become a master capable of leading the entire world. Yoon Jong agreed with a smile, saying that he shared Joe Gul's thoughts. Meanwhile, Cheonma watched from a nearby tree, feeling pleased with the results. He thought to himself that convincing Gum was pretty easy, but he still had a way to go. Before he could think any further, a loud shout interrupted him, demanding the sect leader to come out. Outside the gates of Mount Hua Sect, a group of people were shouting and banging on the door, demanding to be let in immediately. Without warning, the door suddenly burst open and a crowd of people stormed into the sect, causing chaos and demanding that the sect leader come out. Despite the efforts of Ungum and to calm the unruly group, they were not willing to listen. Cheongmyeong watched in disbelief and could not believe that they broke through the gate of Mount Hua Sect. He wondered what the hell was going on. Suddenly, one of the intruders spoke up, saying that they had waited long enough and couldn't afford to wait any longer. They demanded to know what Mount Hua Sect would pay them back. Cheongmyeong was shocked to hear the demand for payment. His mouth hung open in disbelief and couldn't help but question if Mount Hua Sect was really in debt given the current situation. The group of intruders arrived at the residence of the sect leader and began shouting one after another, demanding the sect leader to come out immediately and stop running away. As the sect leader's room opened, everyone's attention turned to the door and silence fell over the crowd. Confidently, the Mount Hua sect leader stood before them and asked why they had come so late at night. Cheongmyeong, who was observing the situation, thought to himself that the sect leader truly embodied the essence of a sect leader of Mount Hua Sect. His every movement and way of speaking exuded a sophisticated aura. One of the intruders couldn't contain his frustration and shouted, questioning why the sect leader was trying to act cool about the situation. Cheongmyeong confirmed his earlier suspicion, thinking to himself that the sect leader was indeed just trying to act cool. A fat man dressed in red robes, who appeared to be the leader of the intruders group, greeted the sect leader and asked how he had been. The sect leader acknowledged the unexpected presence of pavilion owner Kong and expressed his surprise at Kong coming personally. Kong chuckled and explained that he felt uneasy about having to visit them for such a matter. He mentioned that he didn't want to climb Mount Hua again if possible, but due to many people requesting his presence, he had to come here. Kong emphasized that the sect leader needed to understand the reasons behind these people's concerns, as the agreed-upon date had already long passed. The sect leader closed his eyes in contemplation, and Kong continued to speak, stating that they had tried to be understanding of the Mount Hua Sect's situation multiple times. He mentioned that if they strictly followed the contract, they would demand payment for violating the promised date. However, due to the indebtedness they felt towards the Mount Hua Sect, they would try not to be too harsh. Kong set a deadline of 7 days, stating that if the sect leader was unable to repay them within that time, they would confiscate the temple of Mount Hua Sect. The conversation between Kong and the sect leader was interrupted by a hiccup, and everyone turned their attention to the source. Cheongmyeong stood there, covering his mouth. Kong remarked that it seemed he had let the child see something they shouldn't have. Back at the boarding house, Cheongmyeong asked if the merchants were from the Hua prefecture. The disciple confirmed it, and Cheongmyeong pondered silently. Observing Cheongmyeong's reaction, the disciple thought to himself that he should probably stay away from Cheongmyeong, uncertain of what he might do. Joe Gul then asked the disciple if the Hua prefecture was the name of the village below Mount Hua. The disciple replied affirmatively, recalling the name from his days of peddling with his father. Joe Gul questioned if it meant that the Mount Hua sect had borrowed money from the merchants. The disciple admitted that he wasn't sure about that, but he did know about Kong, the owner of the Tahoe Pavilion in the Hua prefecture. He revealed that Kong was a wealthy merchant involved in various business ventures. Cheongmyeong, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up, questioning if Kong was the owner of the Tahoe Pavilion. Joe Gul and the disciple looked shocked, noticing that Cheongmyeong's expression was far from normal, and they pleaded with him to calm down. Cheongmyeong scoffed at their request, asking if they were telling him to calm down. His thoughts raced, realizing that the Tahoe Pavilion had originally belonged to the Mount Hua Sect. With a firm grip on the disciple's collar, Cheongmyeong demanded to know if the man truly was the owner of the Tahoe Pavilion, and if he was trying to confiscate the Mount Hua Sect's temple after lending them money. The disciple, tears welling up in his eyes, confirmed that it was indeed the case. Cheongmyeong released his hold on the disciple and contemplated the situation. He thought that something didn't add up. It was strange that the Tahoe Pavilion, originally belonging to the Mount Hua Sect, would lend them money in the first place. He realized that since things didn't make sense, they had likely been heading in the wrong direction all along. Cheongmyeong called out to Joe Gul, who responded nervously, unsure of what to expect. Cheongmyeong instructed him to bring that thing. Confused, Joe Gul looked at Cheongmyeong, who reiterated his request for that thing. Suddenly, Joe Gul realized what it was and hurriedly promised to bring it right away. As he retrieved a black uniform and handed it to Cheongmyeong, Joe Gul couldn't help but ask what he intended to do with it. Cheongmyeong, now dressed in the new outfit, began explaining the concept behind his actions. He referred to an old saying in Buddhist literature that advocated the need to go against established norms. He emphasized that to truly follow the path of Tao, one must be willing to defy it, even if it meant going against revered figures like Buddhas or forefathers. Covering his head and face with a mask, Cheongmyeong stood prepared in his new attire and proclaimed his intention to seek the true way of Tao. This declaration shocked both Joe Gul and the disciple, who expressed their disbelief and concern. They questioned Cheongmyeong's plan to leave the sect temple dressed like that, calling him a crazy bastard. Cheongmyeong leaped over the walls, his eyes catching sight of a brightly illuminated building in the distance. Laughter resonated from within the building. Inside, the group of merchants who had trespassed into the Mount Hua Sect, demanding repayment of their debt, were having a celebration. One of the men remarked on the sect leader's perplexed expression, while another expressed no surprise, stating that they had essentially given the sect a final warning. One of the merchants directed his attention towards Kong, noting that the sect leader appeared even more bewildered because Kong, the pavilion owner, was present. Kong acknowledged that as a profit-seeking merchant, he felt remorseful about their current predicament. He expressed regret considering the long-standing positive relationship they had enjoyed over many generations. The man who had questioned Kong reassured him, acknowledging his efforts and generosity, assuring him that everyone would praise his magnanimity. Kong responded with a hopeful tone, expressing his wish for that to be the case, followed by hearty laughter. After taking a sip of liquor, Kong contemplated the carefree nature of the merchants before him. He marveled at their ability to live with such simplicity, yet he understood that the power of the Mount Hua Sect was not something to be underestimated. The true strength of the sect lay not in their combat prowess, but rather in their extensive history. In the Shanxi province, it was challenging to find someone without some connection to the Mount Hua Sect. However, Kong noted that in recent times, the sect had become significantly weaker. He compared them to a delicate duck whose skin easily tore apart, even with minimal force from chopsticks. Suddenly, one of the men directed a question to Kong, inquiring about his plans for the temple once they confiscated it from the Mount Hua Sect. He suggested that selling it might be difficult, so perhaps they could take something else from the sect instead. Kong confidently responded that the value of the temple went beyond their imagination. Although it might appear as an old temple at first glance, he guaranteed its worth. The man who had asked the question laughed, admitting his lack of understanding. He sought clarification from Kong. As Kong put food into his mouth, he silently thought to himself that all these merchants were idiots. Kong gently placed the chopsticks on the table and began to explain his plan. He conveyed that he couldn't reveal all the details directly, but they could utilize the enemies of the Mount Hua Sect to their advantage. He suggested that numerous sects would seize the opportunity and willingly spend a substantial amount of money to acquire the temple solely to erase the existence of the Mount Hua Sect. Kong assured them not to worry and promised to ensure that everyone's investment would be worthwhile. The people present looked at Kong in admiration, and one of them stood up, acknowledging his wisdom. Filled with excitement and agreement, they all raised their glasses in unison. A toast was proposed to pavilion owner Kong, and they joyfully clinked their glasses together, cheering for their shared endeavor. As one of the merchants strolled alone on the street, he reveled in the exhilaration of the party. Thoughts raced through his mind, contemplating the immense fortune he could regain from the Mount Hua Sect. He believed that pavilion owner Kong had a meticulous approach to money matters, further fueling his confidence. Feeling great and under the illumination of the bright moon, the merchant expressed his satisfaction. However, his elation quickly subsided as he looked up and realized that there was no moon in the sky. Dismissing it as a new moon, he reasoned that it would be safer to walk through the main streets on such nights. Just then, he noticed a blurred figure up ahead. Squinting his eyes, the merchant saw a person standing before him. It was none other than Cheongmyeong, whose face was obscured by a mask. Cheongmyeong called out to the merchant, instructing him to halt. In a drunken state, the merchant's thoughts meandered, viewing Cheongmyeong as a peculiar burglar who seemed to have stepped out of a drawing. He couldn't help but find it odd that burglars would dress so conspicuously, seemingly announcing their intentions to the entire world. The merchant, taken back by Cheongmyeong's presence, questioned if he was a burglar. Cheongmyeong reassured him that he had no interest in money and simply wanted answers. He promised that if the merchant cooperated, he would be allowed to go unharmed. The merchant appeared unafraid and said that he didn't have much of a choice in the matter. He then revealed with a smile that he had several friends accompanying him, indicating that he was not alone. In a moment, half a dozen guards emerged, encircling the merchant. Observing the guards, Cheongmyeong remarked that they appeared to be high-class bodyguards. One of the bodyguards inquired about their course of action, suggesting the possibility of killing Cheongmyeong, but the merchant suggested that they captured him instead and ensure that he could still speak. As the bodyguards attacked Cheongmyeong, the merchant couldn't help but think to himself that he wasn't a fan of violent scenes, contemplating the situation at hand. The merchant winced at the painful cries he heard, realizing that the level of force used seemed excessive. Suddenly, a loud noise caught his attention and he turned around, assuming that Cheongmyeong had been defeated. He expressed his frustration, reminding them that he had specifically instructed them to ensure Cheongmyeong could still speak. However, to his surprise, the scene before him was completely different from his expectations. Cheongmyeong stood unharmed while all of Kong's bodyguards were lying on the ground. With a final throw of the last bodyguard, Cheongmyeong remarked on the importance of people understanding what others were telling them and the consequences of refusing to do so. Cheongmyeong called out to the merchant, motioning him to come closer. He reiterated his offer, stating that if the merchant answered his questions, he would be released unharmed. The terrified merchant stammered in agreement. Seizing the merchant by the collar and clenching his fist, Cheongmyeong delivered a warning. He explained that if the merchant had simply answered his questions initially, he would have let him go unharmed. However, since the merchant chose to fight back, he would now face the consequences. Cheongmyeong locked eyes with the merchant, assuming a punching stance, and confidently stated that he would ensure the merchant would still be able to speak after their encounter. After some time had passed, the merchant's mouth had swelled, resembling that of a pig. He began explaining the situation to Cheongmyeong. Cheongmyeong, intrigued by the merchant's claim, questioned him further. He asked if it was true that they had loaned over 100,000 nyangs to the Mount Hua Sect. The merchant hesitantly confirmed, fearing Cheongmyeong's reaction. In a stern tone, Cheongmyeong expressed his disbelief. He stated that even if he were to sell everything the merchant possessed, including their underwear, he wouldn't be able to gather 10,000 nyangs, let alone 100,000. He pointed out the absurdity of the claim, stating that the Mount Hua Sect was on the verge of collapsing, making a loan even more dubious. The merchant attempted to offer an explanation, stating that high interest rates worked in a particular manner. According to him, when money was loaned with a high interest rate, the interest would continue to accumulate as long as the borrower failed to repay it. Over time, the interest would become significantly higher than the principal amount. With a laugh, he added that they could then take the money. Cheongmyeong interrupted the merchant, striking it on the head. He sternly expressed his disapproval, emphasizing that such behavior was nothing to be proud of. Additionally, he questioned the merchant about his claim of being the owner of Hua fabric shop. With hesitation, the merchant responded, acknowledging that he was indeed the owner. Cheongmyeong proceeded to inquire about the timeline of the merchant's ownership, questioning when exactly he had purchased the fabric shop. Confused by the question, the merchant sought clarification, stating that he didn't fully understand what Cheongmyeong was asking. He explained that their family had owned the fabric shop for generations. Cheongmyeong appeared shocked by this revelation, unable to comprehend the merchant's response. Cheongmyeong contemplated the situation, convinced that things couldn't be as they seemed. He recalled how the Hua fabric shop, along with other thriving businesses in the Hua prefecture, were originally owned by the Mount Hua Sect. The sect's efforts had played a significant role in the development of the prefecture, which was once nothing more than a rural village with a few scattered farms. Although the sect had entrusted the actual management of these businesses to stand-in representatives, it appeared that they had taken advantage of the sect's vulnerable state to seize control. In a fit of anger, Cheongmyeong began striking the merchant, who pleaded for him to stop, bewildered by the sudden attack. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him scoundrel. As Cheongmyeong turned around, he was confronted by a guard who had awakened. The guard accused him of a cowardly surprise attack and demanded to know his identity. He identified himself as escort warrior Jung Bin and said that Cheongmyeong must have heard of him. Cheongmyeong apologized, admitting that he wasn't knowledgeable about such things. Perplexed, he questioned why Jung Bin was so interested in his identity. Jung Bin insisted that he should at least know the identity of those who would meet their demise by his blade. Ignoring Cheongmyeong's previous defeat of him, he considered Cheongmyeong to be an arrogant bastard. Drawing his sword, Jung Bin prepared to attack while warning Cheongmyeong to brace himself. Cheongmyeong observed Jung Bin and contemplated to himself. He acknowledged that Jung Bin was undoubtedly stronger than him in terms of pure strength, including inner strength, physical power, and speed. Cheongmyeong recognized that his own abilities were incomparable to Jung Bin in those aspects. However, he firmly believed that it did not make him weaker than Jung Bin. Cheongmyeong understood that pure strength and speed alone did not define one's overall strength in a fight. With determination, Cheongmyeong struck a sword that was lying on the ground, skillfully catching it as it flew up, and used it to block Jung Bin's sword attack. At that moment, he pondered his advantage over Jung Bin. He possessed the experience of his past as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. Cheongmyeong realized that if he lacked pure strength, he could borrow it from his opponent. Using Jung Bin's own attack force, Cheongmyeong skillfully redirected it, sending Jung Bin flying backward. Seizing the opportunity, Cheongmyeong employed a sword technique that conjured a vision of plum blossoms, symbolizing his expertise, and swiftly attacked Jung Bin once again. While doing so, he confidently remarked, "Come back after training more," but a realization struck him abruptly and beads of sweat formed on his face as he looked back at the merchant. He pondered, realizing that he had made a mistake and accidentally revealed his sword techniques, especially since he had even drawn the plum blossom flower buds. The merchant's astute observation of his polished and beautiful sword technique, the high level of martial arts displayed, and the faintly emitting pure ki left Cheongmyeong concerned. He wondered if the merchant had figured out his true identity. However, the merchant asked him an unexpected question. The merchant asked if Cheonmyeong was affiliated with the Southern Edge sect, and this question left Cheongmyeong bewildered. After a brief pause, Cheongmyeong confirmed his connection to the Southern Edge sect. This confirmation sparked great excitement in the merchant, who eagerly offered his assistance and promised to answer any questions to the best of his abilities. Taken back by the merchant's enthusiasm, Cheongmyeong responded with a surprised voice expressing his gratitude. Inside the boarding room of the Mount Hua Sect, Jogul's impatience grew evident as he wondered silently why it was taking so long. Jong, aware of Jogul's restlessness, tried to reassure him, reminding him that Cheongmyeong was not foolish and would return in due time as long as no accidents had befallen him. Suddenly, the door to the boarding house swung open and Cheongmyeong stepped inside. Inquisitively, he asked the group if anything had occurred during his absence. Without delay, Cheongmyeong proceeded to change his clothes, while Jong posed a question of his own, curious about any significant events that had taken place outside. Cheongmyeong casually responded, stating that not much had happened. He expressed his gratitude for the kind treatment he had received and even mentioned receiving some extra money. However, his mind drifted back to the encounter with the merchant who had questioned him about his affiliation with the Southern Edge sect. Inwardly, Cheongmyeong contemplated the situation. He considered it fortunate that the merchant had failed to recognize his true identity, but a sense of bitterness lingered. The loss of the plum blossom sword techniques meant that they no longer symbolized the Mount Hua Sect. Cheongmyeong couldn't help but ponder the fact that Jongsun Yu, who had spent his entire life in the Hua prefecture, had failed to associate the sword technique he witnessed with the renowned Mount Hua Sect. Jogul's curiosity interrupted Cheongmyeong's train of thought, prompting him to inquire about what he had been doing outside of the temple. Cheongmyeong evaded the question, considering it unsuitable for a child like Jogul to know about. Jogul, though intimidated, mustered the courage to point out that Cheongmyeong himself was also a child. Cheongmyeong brushed off the comment and swiftly changed the subject, urging Jogul to gather everyone for training. Jogul, surprised by the prospect of training on that particular day, voiced his astonishment. Cheongmyeong responded firmly, emphasizing that regardless of the weather conditions, be it rain, snow, or wind, they would not miss a single day of training from that day forward. Even if the Mount Hua Sect were to fall, they would not take a day off. Jogul's determination grew as he contemplated his readiness for the challenge. Jogul expressed his commitment to gathering everyone promptly, only to be interrupted by Cheongmyeong, who stated that he would not be participating in the training session due to other obligations. Jong voiced his concern to Cheongmyeong, asserting that the training session would only be effective if Cheongmyeong were present. Jong suggested that they could train on their own that day, but for the disciples to truly exert themselves, Cheongmyeong's presence was necessary. Cheongmyeong acknowledged Jong's concern. As Jong and Jogul prepared to leave the room, Jong mentioned their departure, to which Cheongmyeong responded with goodbye. Cheongmyeong lay down on his bed, releasing a sigh of frustration. His mind raced, contemplating the current situation. The Stand representatives had taken over the businesses, and the account books that could have proven the Mount Hua Sect's ownership of those businesses appeared to have been destroyed by the Heavenly Demon sect members along with Mount Hua itself. Cheongmyeong deduced that if the account books still existed, none of this would have transpired. He briefly entertained the idea of launching a direct assault to eliminate the merchants responsible, but quickly dismissed it. Realizing that such an action would only portray the Mount Hua Sect as forcing a young child into wrongdoing, Cheongmyeong understood the need for a legitimate excuse. He needed a way for the Mount Hua Sect to avoid repaying the merchants while providing evidence that the businesses originally belonged to this sect. However, the challenge he faced was not knowing where to find the necessary excuses and evidence. At that moment, Cheongmyeong's memory resurfaced. He recalled the account book and how he had seen Sayong Jangmun writing in it on several occasions. Whenever he entered the room, Jangmun would hastily conceal a few volumes of the account books they possessed. This recollection sparked a thought in Cheongmyeong's mind. Were there only a few volumes? As Cheongmyeong rose from the bed, determination etched on his face, he continued to ponder the whereabouts of the remaining account books. He couldn't fathom that there would be only a few volumes when the Mount Hua Sect managed numerous businesses. He firmly believed that Sayong Jangmun must have hidden the rest somewhere else, and the most plausible location was the secret storage accessible only to the sect leader. Recalling the rumors he had heard about the secret storage, Cheongmyeong's thoughts raced. If such storage did exist, its entrance would likely be within the sect leader's residence, which had remained unchanged over the years. Located somewhere in Mount Hua, surrounded by martial art masters, it had to be cleverly concealed, possibly hidden in the hills behind the sect leader's residence. Cheongmyeong speculated that the storage might be underground, ensuring its secrecy from prying eyes. A smile crept across Cheongmyeong's face as he realized the magnitude of his upcoming endeavor. Unprecedented treasure hunting awaited him, driven by the need to save the Mount Hua Sect. With a leap of determination, he propelled himself out of his room window. In midair, Cheongmyeong's thoughts turned to Cheonma. Although he intended to break into the storage, he silently pleaded for forgiveness. Saving the Mount Hua Sect had become his foremost priority. If possible, he wished to retrieve the account books and hand them over to the sect leader without laying his own hands on them. Cheongmyeong stumbled and fell onto his buttocks as a powerful blast reverberated through the mountains. He cried out in pain and said that he might die at this rate. Realizing the enormity of the task before him, Cheongmyeong acknowledged that searching an entire mountain, even a small hill like this, was not an easy task. He questioned the feasibility of his approach. He then summoned his inner energy, concentrated it between his hands, and released it into the ground, hoping to detect any significant empty spaces that might indicate the presence of a storage room. He believed that such a space would be the key sought. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Cheongmyeong lay on the ground, panting heavily. Doubt crept into his mind, causing him to question whether he was in the right location. After a brief moment of rest, Cheongmyeong resolved to give it one final try. With a deep breath, he gathered his remaining strength, preparing for another attempt. Suddenly, a look of astonishment crossed his face, and he halted his energy projection. Seizing a pickaxe nearby, he felt a surge of excitement. He had found it, the storage room. With renewed determination, Cheongmyeong began to dig, unyielding in his pursuit. He knew that the confirmation he sought lay just beyond the surface, and he was determined to see it with his own eyes. After a considerable time spent excavating, he uncovered a floor made of bricks, a clear indication that he had indeed reached his desired destination. Cheongmyeong's mind raced with excitement and anticipation. He contemplated the possibility that this hidden storage was more than just a structure made of bricks, considering that it could potentially house all of Mount Hua's account books and treasures. Gripping a brick in his hand, he peered through the hole and to his astonishment, discovered a hidden hallway beyond. Filled with a surge of triumph, Cheongmyeong realized that he had found the pathway leading to the secret storage. However, his exhilaration was abruptly interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. To his surprise, it was the sect leader himself walking down the hallway. Cheongmyeong realized that the sect leader must have been aware of the hidden safe. As the sect leader arrived at a door and halted, Cheongmyeong observed intently, pondering whether the scratched door before him was the entrance to the secret storage. Confusion gripped him as he witnessed the sect leader's hand trembling, yet hesitating to take any action. Observing the sect leader, Cheongmyeong couldn't help but notice the lack of action. He saw a man who appeared helpless, unable to change the circumstances befalling a collapsing Mount Hua Sect. Martial arts studies were declining and the sect's wealth was dwindling. Leading the sect under such circumstances must have been a deeply disheartening task. Cheongmyeong wondered what it would feel like to watch the place he had dedicated his entire life protecting crumble without being able to prevent it. Yet, the sect leader couldn't express this feeling to anyone because he was the one the disciples relied on. Consequently, he endured the pain and sorrow and solitude confined to places like these. After the sect leader departed, Cheongmyeong removed the bricks, creating a hole through which he entered the hallway. Determined, he walked toward the door and acknowledged his fault in the situation. However, he believed it was not too late to make a change. With resolute determination, he vowed to swing open the stubborn door and take action. Cheongmyeong placed his hand on the door, channeling his energy towards it with determination. However, to his astonishment, the energy he sent toward the door rebounded. It was then that he realized the truth. The door was made of everlasting metal, renowned as the strongest metal in the world. It was said to be even more valuable than gold and had a thickness of at least 1 foot. Cutting through such material would require the skill of the strongest master in the world, and even they would struggle to make a mark. This revelation explained why the sect leader had never attempted to open it. Gazing at the seemingly impenetrable door, Cheongmyeong contemplated the martial arts prowess of Cheonma. He knew that Cheongma's level of martial arts was not high enough to cut through everlasting metal. Cheongmyeong reasoned that if Cheongma had managed to pass through the door, there must be a way to open it. The key lay in finding that method, and if only Cheongmyeong could uncover it, he might have a chance at accessing what lay beyond. This is the end of Return of the Blossoming Blade Part 1. Thank you to keep watching the content from this channel. Remember to like and subscribe to keep you updated with our latest content. See you in the next part.